The air in Judge Arthur Pierce's courtroom was a predator. It stalked the space between the polished pews, thick with the scent of old wood, and fear suffocating hope before it could draw a breath. For 35 years, Judge Pierce had been the apex predator in this ecosystem, a man whose gavel fell like a guillotine on the spirits of those he deemed unworthy. Today, however, he was about to encounter a spirit that refused to be broken, a quiet defiance that would unravel his entire kingdom. Leona Hayes sat in the defendant's chair, her hands folded in her lap, a portrait of calm she did not feel. At 36, she was a cardiac nurse, a woman trained to remain steady in the face of life and death. But the charges being read aloud, public disturbance resisting arrest, verbal assault on an officer, felt like a fiction designed to swallow her whole. The truth was simpler and far more corrosive. The truth had begun 3 weeks ago under the jaundiced glow of a single parking lot light. It had been 1:00 a.m. Leona, still in her scrubs after a grueling 12-hour shift at Westbrook General, was sitting in her own Honda Civic, in her own assigned parking space, decompressing before heading inside. A police cruiser had rolled up behind her, its spotlight instantly painting the interior of her car in a harsh, accusatory white. Officer Riley approached her window, his hand resting on his sidearm, his expression a mask of bored suspicion. "Evening," he'd said, his tone suggesting it was anything but. "Bit late to be sitting out here, isn't it?" "I just got home from work," Leona had replied, trying to keep the exhaustion out of her voice. "I'm a nurse." "License and registration?" It wasn't a request. She had complied, handing over the documents. He had scrutinized them under his flashlight, as if searching for a flaw. "You live here?" "Yes, apartment 4B, this is my parking spot." "We've had some break-ins in the area," he said vaguely. "People casing the place." The implication hung in the air between them, ugly and unmistakable. In this neighborhood, a black woman sitting in her car was by default a suspect. "Officer," Leona had said, her voice steady but firm. "Am I being detained, or am I free to go inside to my apartment?" It was the question that broke the dam. Riley's face hardened. "You'll go when I say you can go. Step out of the car." "For what reason?" "I haven't done anything wrong." That was when it had escalated. His voice grew louder, his demands more aggressive. When she had insisted on knowing the reason for her detainment, he had wrenched the car door open, grabbed her arm, and hauled her out. The charge of resisting was for pulling her arm back in a reflex of shock and pain. The verbal assault was for crying out, "You have no right to do this." Now, she sat before Judge Arthur Pierce, a man whose reputation was a chilling legend in the legal community. He was known for his draconian sentences and a particular venomous disdain for defendants of color who didn't display what he considered the proper level of deference. Lawyers called his courtroom the butcher shop. "Your Honor," the prosecutor droned, a man whose delivery was as gray as his suit. "The defendant has demonstrated a clear pattern of anti-authoritarian behavior." Officer Riley was simply ensuring the safety of the community when Ms. Hayes chose to become belligerent. Leona's public defender, a young, earnest, and visibly terrified man named Ben Carter, shuffled his papers. He was a lamb in a lion's den. "Your Honor, if I may," he stammered, "my client is a licensed practical nurse with no prior record. She was exhausted after a long shift. She was in her own vehicle, in her own parking spot." Judge Pierce waved his hand. in a gesture of supreme dismissal. "Spare me the sob stories, Mr. Carter. Every defendant has an excuse." He fixed his cold grey eyes on Leona, peering over his reading glasses like a hawk studying its prey. "Ms. Hayes, you have disrupted the peace, you have shown a complete and utter lack of respect for law enforcement, and you have the audacity to sit there with that defiant look on your face." "That's not true," Leona began, but Pierce's gavel cracked down with the sound of a breaking bone. "I was not finished." He roared, his voice bouncing off the high ceilings. "You people always believe the rules don't apply to you, always so quick to cry, victim to blame the world for your own failings." The phrase hung in the air, thick and poisonous. "You people." The courtroom fell into a heavy silence. Everyone knew what he meant. Leona felt a hot surge of rage in her chest, but years of navigating a world that saw her color before her character had taught her to bank that fire, to turn it into a cold, hard resolve. She held his gaze. In the back of the courtroom, a distinguished-looking older man in a dark, impeccably tailored suit, who had been observing the proceedings all morning, made a slow, deliberate note on a legal pad. Pierce leaned back, savoring the moment. This was his domain. "Ms. Hayes," he said, drawing the words out with relish, "do you comprehend the gravity of your actions? Do you understand that your behavior is a symptom of a much larger disease in our society?" "Your Honor," Leona said, her voice a marvel of control, "I understand that I was sitting in my car when Officer Riley approached me without cause. I understand that I have a right to ask why I am being detained. And I understand that when I asserted that right, I was arrested." Pierce's face flushed a deep mottled purple. His jaw clenched so tight, a muscle jumped along his cheek. "You understand nothing?" He snapped, his facade of judicial calm shattering. "Your insolence is precisely the problem. Your arrogance—" He shot to his feet, a towering figure of fury in his black robes. "Given the severity of your offenses and your patent lack of remorse, I am ordering you to approach this bench and kneel." A collective gasp swept through the gallery. Kneeling was not a sentence. It was not a procedure. It was a ritual of humiliation, a demand for feudal submission. "You will kneel, Ms. Hayes," Pierce commanded, his eyes gleaming with a feverish light. "And you will publicly apologize for your disrespect to this court and to the officer you maligned. After you have demonstrated the proper respect, I will consider your sentence." Ben Carter was on his feet, his face pale with shock. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. It is unprecedented and deeply inappropriate. I object in the strongest possible—" "Sit down, counsel," Pierce thundered, his voice echoing like a gunshot, "or I will hold you in contempt so fast your head will spin." Ben sank back into his chair, defeated. Leona's heart hammered against her ribs, but deep inside, a core of stillness remained. She had endured a lifetime of indignities. This was just one more. She took a breath, preparing to rise, but as she did, something else happened. From the back of the courtroom came the sound of a chair scraping against the floor. The older man in the dark suit stood up. "Actually, Judge," he said, his voice cutting through the tense silence with an authority that was absolute, "I believe there has been quite enough of this." Pierce's head snapped toward the back of the room, his face a mask of incandescent rage. "Who are you? Who dares to interrupt my court? This is contempt, security." The man began to walk down the center aisle, his footsteps measured and deliberate, each one landing with a weight that made the floorboards seem to groan. He moved with a calm, powerful grace that made even Judge Pierce pause. "My name," the man said as he approached the front of the courtroom, "is Marcus Thorne, and I am the Chief Justice of the State's Supreme Court." The color drained from Arthur Pierce's face as if a plug had been pulled. A wave of frantic murmurs swept through the room as lawyers, clerks, and observers recognized the name and the man, and the staggering implication of his presence began to dawn on them. "I have been observing these proceedings this morning." Chief Justice Thorne continued, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the room as the final stage of an ongoing investigation into judicial misconduct. "And what I have witnessed here today, Judge Pierce, is not just a deviation from protocol. It is an abject and utter disgrace to the bench you occupy." Pierce gripped the edge of his mahogany bench, his knuckles turning white. "Chief Justice, I was simply applying the law as I saw fit." "No," Thorne cut him off, his voice like cold steel. He had reached the front of the courtroom and now stood directly before the bench, looking up at the diminished judge. "You were not applying the law. You were indulging in a grotesque pageant of personal prejudice. You engaged in the deliberate, calculated humiliation of a citizen based on nothing more than her race and your own arrogance. Our investigation has been thorough. We have reviewed dozens of complaints transcripts and a particularly illuminating video of your remarks at a judicial conference last year. But seeing it in person, it is somehow even worse than we imagined." Thorne turned to the court reporter. "Let the record show that this proceeding has been recorded in its entirety by my staff, who are also present in this room. Let it also show that Judge Pierce used racially coded language, denied the defendant her right to counsel by silencing her attorney, and attempted to impose an extrajudicial punishment of kneeling, an act which has no basis in law and serves only as an abuse of power." Pierce slumped into his chair, his face ashen, the fury replaced by a dawning abject terror. "Ms. Hayes," Chief Justice Thorne said, turning to Leona, his expression softening. "You are free to go. All charges against you are hereby dismissed with prejudice." He then turned his steely gaze back to the man on the bench. "Judge Pierce, by the authority vested in me as Chief Justice, I am ordering your immediate suspension from this bench pending a full hearing by the Judicial Conduct Board. A formal, comprehensive inquiry into every case you have presided over for the past 10 years will begin immediately. This is a story about what happens when the hidden rot in a system is suddenly exposed to the light. It's about the courage of one woman and the integrity of another man who refused to look away. If you believe that a single moment of accountability can change everything, support our storytelling by subscribing to the channel." The silence that followed was absolute deafening. As for Officer Riley, Thorne added, "His conduct during the initial arrest, which was captured on his dashcam and mysteriously omitted from the evidence file, will be subject to a full internal affairs investigation. He can expect disciplinary proceedings." Leona stood on legs that felt like they might give way. She had walked in here preparing for the worst, a fine community service, perhaps even jail time. She was walking out having witnessed the public immolation of one of the most feared judges in the state. "Ms. Hayes," Thorne said, addressing her directly again, "on behalf of the judicial system, I am profoundly sorry for the outrageous treatment you have endured today. What happened here is a cancer in our courts. I give you my word, we will cut it out." He handed her a business card. "Please, have your attorney contact my office. I believe there are significant grounds for a civil suit against the city." The news spread through the courthouse like a shockwave. Reporters were already scrambling in the hallway. Court staff whispered in stunned clusters, their faces a mixture of shock and something that looked undeniably like relief. A fellow nurse of Leona's hearing, the news rushed up to her in the lobby. "Leo, are you okay? I just heard my uncle went before him 2 years ago. Pierce called him a lazy degenerate and gave him 6 months for a busted taillight." Chief Justice Thorne overheard. "Ma'am," he said gently to the woman, "please have your uncle contact my office. His case will be among the first we review." He turned back to Leona as they reached the grand courthouse steps, where a throng of media was already assembled. "This investigation is going to be massive," he said, his voice grim. "Our preliminary data analysis on Judge Pierce's sentencing, even before this, was alarming. We found that for similar nonviolent offences, he sentenced black defendants to terms that were on average 38% longer than their white counterparts. That's a disparity that statistics cannot justify. It can only be explained by bias. We anticipate overturning hundreds, perhaps thousands of his convictions." Facing the cameras, Thorne was a figure of unwavering authority. He detailed Pierce's misconduct, the suspension, and the launch of a statewide task force to review all complaints of judicial bias. "This is not about one bad apple," he declared, his voice ringing out. "This is about the health of the entire orchard. We will no longer tolerate a culture of silence that allows prejudice to fester in the guise of justice." A reporter shouted a question. "Chief Justice, what message does this send?" Thorne's eyes found Leona in the crowd. He gestured for her to join him at the microphones. She stepped forward, her voice shaking, only for a moment before it found its strength. "The message is that you have to speak up," Leona said, her voice carrying over the crowd. "What happened to me today happens every day to people who don't have the power to fight back, who are told to be quiet and accept injustice as the cost of living. The system failed me, but today, one person of integrity made the system work. My concern now is for all the people who stood in that courtroom when no one was watching." 3 months later, Leona sat in a different room, a hearing room before the Judicial Conduct Board. The investigation had unearthed a staggering pattern of abuse spanning Arthur Pierce's entire career. He was stripped of his credentials, barred from practicing law for life, and faced multiple criminal charges. He looked like a ghost, a hollowed-out man whose power had been his lifeblood. Leona felt no triumph, only a quiet, somber relief. Afterward, Chief Justice Thorne met her in the hallway. "The work is just beginning," he said. "Real reform, bias training, stronger oversight, transparent complaint processes. Your courage started this, Ms. Hayes. You bore witness." As she left the building that day, Leona thought about how one single moment, one act of defiance, one person watching, could unravel decades of injustice. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her nursing supervisor. "The board just approved the new patient advocacy wing. We're calling it the Hayes Center for Community Justice." She smiled. It had been a long, brutal journey, but she looked back at the courthouse, its stone facade seeming less intimidating now. She knew that even the most powerful walls could crumble when people of courage on both sides of the bench refused to accept injustice as the final word. Justice, she had learned, wasn't a place. It was a fight, and sometimes, against all odds, it was a fight you could win.